Hello, my name's Charlie Winston, and this is my podcast called As We Are, which is inspired by my most recent album, As I Am. It's discussions with people who interest me and inspire me. Some of those people you may know, but others you may never have heard of. But that's not the point, you see, because I'm simply interested in people. So, without further ado, I shall let you discover this episode. Take me as I am. Ian Roderick Gray is a director of film, music videos and commercials. We worked together on my album Square One for the songs Lost in the Memory and The Weekend, which both films won various number of awards at various different film festivals. He's a good friend of mine, and every time we talk, we're never short of stories to share, and it's always a very compelling conversation. But I chose to invite him onto this podcast especially for his story that he has growing up and what drew him towards film and why he wanted to make it so much. And now, without further ado, here is our conversation. Enjoy. Ian Roderick Gray, it's nice to have you with me on my podcast. Thanks very much.
It's lovely to be here.
I'm doing this kind of like really formal intro, but in fact we've known each other a little while and we've worked together a few times.
We have indeed, yeah.
And there's certain there's an award that you've won through some of your work with me. But how did it start? How did we meet? I'm trying to remember how we met.
I was working with the great Adian Coker, making music videos for Adian, and Adian's manager Adham, who was also your manager, became my manager.
That's it.
And
we have shared management.
We have shared management, and I think you'd seen my work, and obviously knew you. Was a big fan of your beautiful voice and beautiful music, and as creative people do, we kind of came together, and eventually, if there's chemistry, I think ultimately it leads to collaboration.
Yeah, and there was. There was chemistry as
so.
well. And we made some cool things together, particularly on my last album, Square One, where we did the epic music video, The Weekend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Which was quite a mission for you particularly, I remember. And then the less epic in a way, but all at the same time still quite epic video, Lost in the Memory, which was the one that actually won a bunch of accolades.
Yeah, well, they both actually
They both
awards.
Did.
Yeah, they both did. But I prefer Lost in the Memory. And funny enough, even though it appears smaller in scope, it's a lot more ambitious in terms of what we were both trying to do. Yeah. And for me, filmmaking is about. Yeah, I think so. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it was more ambitious because it was like we talked a lot about doing one shots, and you were really into doing. I mean, in fact, both films, The Weekend and Lost in the Memory, look like one shot, except one has trickery. Well, they both have trickery, but one is more theatrical in the set, which is Lost in the Memory. It's more theatrical in the sense that it's raw theatre, where you're really not tricking too much, but the other one is more theatrical in terms of the obvious things we see, which is where it's done in a film set and stuff. But
and also one is an actual one take film, and you don't get a lot of those these days.
Which is
Lost in the Memory is so that really was one take, which meant that any kind of mistake in the process of filming, whether it's through audio or through picture, meant we had to immediately abort and start again from scratch.
Oh yes, and we certainly did.
We did.
We did many times, but it's so amazing because we started out shooting. I mean, it took a long time to set it all up and then rehearse it through the house, and then start filming. But every time we filmed, if there was one person that made a mistake, we'd cut it and start. Well, you would cut it and we'd start again. So I think I must have sung that song about 40 times in one day.
I would say probably about 40 times. Yeah, your voice really held up. I mean, it's incredible. Because actually, that's another thing that is very unusual about Lost in the Memory, is that it's not just a music video. In fact, it's not really a music video, because music videos are obviously synced. You'll mime to playback, like Weekend was mimed, right? Because that's the process of music video. we were actually recording the audio. So the audio had just as much significance as the visuals, which is not ever the case in music videos, which means we might have had a perfect take from the visual standpoint, but if the audio wasn't right, because the original idea was to, the original idea was to have that actually act as, I believe, the song on Square One. Raw, very much kind of inspired by Astral Weeks. This idea of let's just record it and see what happens. And so, if you remember, the acoustics in the place that we recorded it were so incredible, and depending on where you walked around, it would change the tone of the song.
I know. Well, that was the inspiration of the whole thing, really. I mean, from the very get-go, it was how can I do a recording in this place and capture these different ambiences? And it was so much fun. I think this particular video was a great thing to make with you, because it was a great insight for me on an element of filmmaking which was so. It was like a real team special, teamwork.
Yeah.
Everyone was in it together, and everyone had to really work together. Often on film sets, and very much so on the weekend, there's more of a hierarchy of chain of command. It didn't feel like that way on Lost in the Memory. No,
it was the most collaborative thing I've ever made, actually.
Really?
And it really was, yeah. And I say that because usually there is kind of, it can become territorial, even if you have a very accessible set on a film set. And even if you're the type of director, or if you're working with a producer that likes to make sure that everybody feels included. And that tends to be how I like to work. I like to make sure that everybody feels like they're part of the process. I don't believe, in any way that the director should be the dictator. It should really be, it's one role, and the DOP is another role, and they're all significant. But there's still, as you said, an element of hierarchy, and everybody has to kind of fall into a certain protocol in order to make something work. But in this case, the audio section had, it was just as important as the visuals. We all had to work together to make it work. That meant that, if my clumsy feet kept on knocking a microphone or stepping on floorboards, it would destroy what you guys were trying to do, and we'd have to start again, and vice versa. If the take wasn't particularly good, or the focus wasn't good, or you stepped out of the light, even if your vocals were amazing, it meant that the picture wouldn't work either. So the focus and the concentration and the team aspect of it is completely unparalleled. I've never seen anything like it. And I remember when we got it, because it's the very last take we did before the light dropped. And Alfred Thurl, who's the director of photography, kept on saying, it's going to be the last one because I know the light's going to be perfect. And then we did it, and I remember everybody just paused. We looked at playback on the video. You checked playback on the audio. Audio was great. Video was great. And everybody just jumped up into this massive embrace. And it was this kind of very, very, very rare euphoric moment that you don't often get. Yeah, it was beautiful. Really beautiful.
It really was.
Pure raw filmmaking is what it was. You don't get that very often.
Yeah. You've done a lot of films now. You've done a lot of different... not so much... I mean, you've done a lot of music videos. Is that correct? You've especially done a lot of music. Yeah. You've made... in particular, you devoted your 3 or 4 or 5 years of your life to one big film that you made about an artist. In hindsight, what was the process of making that film?
Well, so he considers himself an artist, genuinely. It's not... He's not being facetious. It's not a joke. He really does think of himself as an artist. And
would you call him an artist?
Yeah, I do think so, because he has a consistent thread amongst everything that he does, and there's actual application of thought and consistency to what he does. So it's not just a chance thing of him saying, "Oh, I'm just going to go and do this." There is a process that runs through every single stunt he's pulled, right? And he calls it performance art, and he's very consistent with what he does and how he does it. Some people will say that it's more like vandalism. But there have been entire art movements, like the Stuckist movement, that have been based around that concept, which have been legitimized by the fine art community. And the thing about the art world is it's all about hype, and it's all about having a good PR person, because the difference between a Damien Hirst post-fame and pre-fame is millions of pounds. But there's nothing that's different in the art. It's just about whatever is decided, is worthy of spending that money, and whoever wants to buy that, they put the value on something immediately. So I never expected it to be a feature film. I thought it was going to be a short film. And a friend of mine, Dylan Harvey, who I ended up making the film with, he had met this guy through some questionable means.
Shall we just say what the film is called? Because we didn't...
Yeah, so the film is called The Banksy Job, and it's about a self-proclaimed art-political terrorist called AK-47, who is the leader and frontman of the Al-Qaeda, art terrorist organisation.
Yeah.
And it's loosely about... It's a real story. It's a documentary heist film is the way that it was marketed, I suppose. And it's about this guy, AK-47, who rose to fame for stealing a Banksy statue that was about 20 foot tall in the middle of London. And he held it to ransom. And for the first time ever, Banksy came out of hiding to address the situation. And this very bizarre feud between the two of them that lasted about 12 years ended up unfolding, resulting in this statue, which was worth about £1 million, being stolen back again, remade, stolen again. And it ended up being this very, very bizarre kind of endless saga and a battle of wits. And ultimately, it's just about one aspiring artist just wanting respect from a much bigger artist.
And did he ever gain respect from Banksy?
Well, Banksy, I mean, aside from the fact that Banksy came out in The Guardian and did an entire, he did 3 interviews with Simon Hatterston, all about AK-47. So aside from that, which in itself is kind of a mark of respect, when the statue was put back but modified, it became... So just a quick short thing on this. It started off as a pastiche of Rodin's The Thinker with a traffic cone on its head, and suddenly it became The Drinker. And then when AK-47 appropriated it, he didn't steal it, but he appropriated it.
You mean Banksy made it The Drinker?
Banksy made it The Drinker, yeah. So it was a complete pastiche of Rodin's The Thinker. The only difference was it had a traffic cone on its head, and therefore it became The Drinker, according to Banksy. So what AK-47 did was effectively the same thing that Banksy did to Rodin. He took it, put a toilet seat in the back of it, and he called it The Stinker. Then he put it back out again. Yeah. So as far as he was concerned, this is kind of traditional world of street art, which is what you do. You tag a wall, somebody else comes along and they adapt it, they modify it, and that's just understood. And Banksy comes from the world of street art. So AK-47 felt like he was just honouring this tradition. But Banksy didn't quite see it that way, and Banksy's manager definitely didn't see it that way, especially when it turned out that AK-47 could potentially sell this statue for £1 million. Kept it in its back garden in Hackney, so it kind of changed the dynamic a little bit.
So let's go back to you. I know I understand that making a documentary is an incredibly unpredictable scenario and very tenuous in terms of, is it going to become a film that's worthy of watching, or people will be be interested. So that must have been a question going through your mind throughout the entire How long did it take?
All in all, I was on it for about 5 years through to having the release in Tribeca, so in New York. So it was a long festival. Time.
So how did you go through some difficult moments making it?
Yeah, we did. We had quite... At the beginning stages, it was very quick. So I'll give you a very brief rundown of what happened. We found the story. I met AK-47. He's an extremely charismatic guy. Some people find him very, very irritating. I found him larger than life, and I found him very funny. But also, he had a legitimate story, and he was authentic, and he was a true original too. So he told me the full story, and he'd recorded everything. But the interesting thing, the bit that I found interesting, wasn't necessarily the stuff that he recorded or his story. It was that he was an unreliable narrator who thought he was a reliable narrator. And by that, I mean, he would tell me that he had thousands of members of the Al-Qaeda, and he had proof because he had it on film. And he really believed this. But then when we looked at the mini DV tapes, it's him and 5 people getting high in his living room. But he was convinced that he really was kind of a James Bond villain, right? So every single story he told had an element of truth, but his version of the truth was just so heightened. And so for me, the angle was, because I'm more of a visual director, when it comes to directing documentary, I don't really want to do fly-in-the-wall documentary. I prefer to take as visual approach as possible and try and make it look as cinematic as I possibly can. And so I started realising that we could try and show the world through his eyes, but then contradict it with the real footage and show how AK-47 sees the world, by having an underground lair in this giant warehouse in the middle of nowhere with thousands of these AK-47 operatives all in their boiler suits and gas masks, whatever the uniform is of the Al-Qaeda. But then show the archive footage and show that actually, even though technically it's true, his version of that, or the way that he sees it, is very, very different to how other people might see it. but it's still kind of true.
So you had the sticky situation of trying to. Were you trying to help him portray his image, or were you rather doing something like displaying a total inadequate kind of storytelling?
A combination of both. I mean, he's very sensitive, but he's also quite self-aware, and he clocked on about halfway through that part of this was about taking the piss. But since his motto is to take the piss, he couldn't really get too annoyed about it, because that's what he supposedly lives for. But the first time he saw it, the first time he saw a rough cut, he was very upset. But then the second time he saw it, he burst into tears, and he felt like we suddenly captured something, and he really.
And that was the final cut?
No, we did a couple more cuts after that with different audio and some different edits. There were a couple of times where he really started to feel that maybe we were taking advantage of him, and we had to try and win back his trust. And for us, we're just making a film, or at least I'm just making a film. But it's easy to forget, and you'll understand, you'll appreciate this, that it's his likeness, it's his representation that's going to be seen on a big screen. And actually, there's a responsibility to make sure that we're not making fun of him. I love the guy.
It reminds me of one of my podcasts is with Thomas Peter, and he's a photojournalist.
Yeah.
And he was telling me about having to win people's trust over, like in the Ukraine war, having to win over people's trust who just lost their home, and it's a very fragile thing that you have to respect. No matter who it is, or whether you agree with them or not, if they're going to give you their trust, especially and let them into their life, you have to respect that. Much like I do have to respect someone's trust doing a podcast. It's,
absolutely, yeah.
It's
respect is the key word, and I think you do have a responsibility. Once they put that trust into you, you have to make sure that that you're treating them with respect and actually taking them seriously. And even if they're comical, I mean, AK-47 you've met him, he's a comical guy.
Of course. But there's a serious person under there as well.
There is. There's a guy that's living and breathing and got sensitivity and insecurities like the rest of us. Yeah. And the whole film and his whole mission has always been to be accepted in a world that doesn't traditionally accept people from a working class background and is quite elitist.
Right.
And all he's ever wanted is to be taken seriously. And the guy has an unbelievable knowledge about art history, artists. He has a real talent of spotting and developing emerging artists, and he's very respected in that world. There are lots and lots of artists like Stick London, who will credit AK as being one of the guys that gave them their first break. Sarah Pope, who's doing very, very well now. He's been really responsible for that.
So, Ian, when now you've made. Is that your only feature film, or has there been?
Yeah, that's my only feature film.
So and you've made a bunch of music videos and also commercials, right? I mean, you do commercials.
Yeah.
Like, what's your favourite medium between those three disciplines? If you could only do one constantly, which one would it be?
Oh, that's really tough because so I do commercials because it's bread and butter. It's primarily how you make a living if you are lucky enough to direct. Commercials are the means through which you actually get to eat and live. Sure. There's no money generally in music videos. You do it for the love of doing it. And feature films is the pure storytelling element. But what I think people don't understand is that there's only about 1% of directors who actually get to make money from feature films. It is so difficult, especially for indie filmmaking, and the UK has not got a thriving film industry. Very, very difficult to get to that point where you make enough money to actually do it and where it becomes a sustainable career. So you almost have to subsidize yourself by doing something else. But music videos are they've always been one of my great passions. The problem is a lot of the music videos that get made these days are not necessarily the type of videos that I like to make. I grew up in the era of, I sound like an old man talking about, my day, but like Spike Jonze, Michel Gondry, and Chris Cunningham, Jonathan Glazer, Hammered Songs.
The golden age, in very many ways,
incredible, really incredible, man. And
I can remember really couldn't wait to see the next video by them. The Bjork videos and the White Stripes, and it's just like
just amazing,
incredible.
But the fact that you could actually at one point you could go and buy a DVD of their work of just music videos, was not something that was ever, you would never have got that a while back. And so they really did such a great job of transcending the medium and showing the potential of what it could be. The problem is, you don't often get an opportunity to make those kind of videos, and that's why it existed for a brief period of time. And, now you don't get that quite as much.
Do you think it's got anything to do with budgets and how budgets have changed now that streaming kicked in, now that anyone can be a filmmaker?
100%. Yeah. I mean, nobody wants it. There's no use in spending, because you have to remember that, I think, back in the day, it was a marketing tool. And you'll know this better than anybody. A music video was such a great way, if you made a great video, of, first of all, just having a visual to the songs so that you could actually identify the artist. But especially, about 15 years ago, if a video went viral, you're talking about the best form of free marketing, because nothing spreads. Suddenly you've got millions of people checking out a video, and it's just like, you can't really buy that without spending a lot of money. So
yeah, and also, I mean, whether you liked it or disliked it, there was MTV, which could make could completely blow up a track, like
completely,
Nirvana, the hip hop.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's how. So if you look at certain acts like OK Go, their whole career was really built around music videos. They had one viral video that kicked everything off, and then that was it. They knew that they needed to top the last one, and it drove sales. And in a way, it kind of became this thing where the more creative they could be, which is the only time it's ever happened, actually, the more that they could generate, generate sales, and their success would go up. And it was
actually the wife of the singer, I think, who was the creative mastermind.
That's right.
In that,
for the treadmills, especially, for the treadmill.
Yeah, that's where it all started, wasn't it?
That's it.
Yeah. So you haven't said which one if you had no money constraints, which one? Would be?
Feature films.
Without a doubt, yeah. So that's pure storytelling. I mean, we've both talked so much about feature films, but so let's get to your love of that and what drove you towards film. Like, what was it? Is there ever a moment in your life when you had that flash of light that went, this is what I want to do, or was it a gradual thing, or did it start?
No, there wasn't. So I come from a pretty humble background, and where I grew up, I didn't grow up with money. My parents I came from a low economic family, and the small town that I grew up in, which is a place called Fareham, in the south of England, people don't become filmmakers. It's not, you don't have a route or a path to any artistic industry. Basically, you get into sales, or you get into cleaning, or you get into building trade. Most of my friends are builders, or tradesmen, basically. So it's not necessarily, there's not a realistic pathway to do that. It's not, there's just, you don't have prospects. And Fareham is so far away from London, not just geographically, but in terms of the culture, that it's just a faraway dream. But my dad was an aspiring actor when he grew up, and he was a real film buff. So I was raised with films of Kurosawa and David Lean, and all these old classic films, French New Wave films, Truffaut and so forth. And so I didn't realize that was kind of unconventional until years later. But I was watching all of David Lean's epics and classic Japanese cinema with my dad as like a 6-year-old kid. So I was getting this real understanding of acting, because my dad, as I said, he trained as an actor. He never made it as an actor, but he wanted to be an actor. And I'm getting a real understanding of filmmaking at a really young age. And then the other thing that happened is I spent about 1.5 years in my bedroom because I got agoraphobia when I was younger. And I didn't leave my room.
Agoraphobia is the fear of going outside, right?
Fear of going outside, yeah. So effectively, I was just stuck in my bedroom.
Did you actually? Do you remember the fear that you had of going outside?
Yeah, although it's a strange thing now, because it's almost like an out of body experience. When I look back, it's just looking down at somebody, somebody completely different. But I definitely have very, very vivid memories of being, extremely frightened and confused child, basically, and just being convinced that if I went outside, my family would die. It was pretty bleak looking back. It was just, but again, it's one of those things where it's only years later that I realised how bizarre the whole thing was. Because when you're living through it, you don't quite understand that it's not right.
You were how old?
I was just, it was the first, I missed the first year and a half of secondary school. So I guess 10, 11, I guess 11 to 12 and a half, which is probably the worst time to do that. Yeah, it's your formative
so
years.
Young.
Yeah, I was really young, and it was it was so difficult for my parents. And actually the rest of my family, my brother and my sister as well, because nobody could understand what was going on with me. And, I just started gradually getting this psychosomatic illness as a result of it, and, getting weaker and weaker and stuff. But all I could do was watch films, and I became obsessed with films.
So hang on. So you've just thrown a whole ton of things at me there. So I asked you how you got into film, and then you told me you're agoraphobic, and then you told me that at the same time you developed a psychosomatic disorder, and
yeah.
It reminds me of a song on my record called Echo, where I say, "Built these walls to hide behind. Now I'm bouncing round inside like an echo."
Oh, I love that.
You must have felt a bit like that, or not. I don't know. I mean, you were 11 years old, so
no. What happens is you become really comfortable in this space. You become so conditioned to it that the idea of leaving it, this comfort, becomes terrifying. The idea, everything, all anxiety that you feel is outside, right? So you just want to stay there because that's what you know and that's what you can control. A big part of it was lots and lots of my family started dying in close proximity all around the same time. All my grandparents died at the same time. My uncle died on Christmas. It was really, there's a lot of people that started just passing away. And it became this thing where it was a bit too much to process, I think, now looking back on it. And I needed to control something. So this idea of, okay, well, if I can just stay here, then I won't need to worry about that because everything is here. Yeah. I can control that. Nobody can tell me what to do. I don't have the fear. Closer to my family, I didn't really want to leave my mum, my dad's, and it just became this kind of unhealthy thing. And they were trying to figure out what to do about it. And it's really difficult to do anything about this kind of thing because then, of course, what happened is almost as a sort of safety measure, but I started getting sick, and then I was in and out of hospital all the time. So the only time I would leave is to go to hospitals. So I would spend endless times in the hospitals with these crippling migraines and nosebleeds that would last 3 days and stuff. And then back to my bedroom again where I would just stay. My parents tried everything. And then I sort of...
Did you eat properly?
No, I got really fat as well.
Wow.
So they were trying, but I wasn't exercising. So I say eat properly. When you're not exercising, when you don't even leave your bed, you just end up putting on a lot of weight. It's
incredible.
Just so I was a skinny kid, and then by the time I finally went back to school, the main thing was I got really fat, and then I didn't lose the weight again until I was about 16 when I started running and going to the gym, and then got very, very, very skinny for a while. Because I became obsessed with... I think I sort of replaced one thing with another thing. I became obsessed with fitness and just running all the time as a sort of form of therapy in a way, going to the gym every day. So
I developed a psychosomatic disorder at that same age, which is my back, and it became my thing. Did it continue out through your life, or did you?
So what happened is, it was the migraines. I was basically, I suppose in a way you could say, the way to describe it to the uninitiated is you're willing yourself to have pain, right? So in my case, I was willing myself to have these migraines that were so crippling. And so we ended up finding this specialist who had designed this device called an M-Pulse. And what I was led to believe was that this M-Pulse would send these kind of electromagnetic waves or something to your brain, which would help control, which would help control the migraines. So I had to go through this whole series of CAT scans and whatnot and stuff, so they could try and see these frequencies. But I now realise that this was probably a placebo that wasn't real.
It wasn't real,
and that it probably wasn't real.
It wasn't.
It probably was almost this device that I was given to help control migraines. So I was told that when I went through puberty, there was a chance that I might be able to get over this. Right? But I kept this thing around my neck for the next several years, and I would never take it off. So it meant that if I went into the sea, I couldn't get it wet, but I would have to go waist level, and I'd keep my t-shirt on, and I'd always have to have it.
Whoa.
And then when I kept this on until I was about probably 16, and everybody just knew me as having this thing around my neck all the time that would stop these migraines. And then this bizarre moment happened where I was on a beach. And I suddenly just had this thought that maybe this thing wasn't actually real. It might just be a placebo, and that the whole thing was completely in my head. And so I just went in the sea and I broke it. And my parents were freaking out, but I was just like, no, I don't need it. It's not real. Everything makes sense. I just lost my mind for like 5 years.
Whoa!
And ever since I've been completely, it was a really bizarre moment because but what it's done is, it sounds so strange, but I've got such a distinct memory of it. It means that I've always had a lifelong perspective ever since, because I understand the power of the mind and what you can do with the mind. Yeah. And so now I have this whole thing where, everything is controllable if you understand what your brain can do. Because if I can be tricked into stopping having migraines from a device that's just effectively a piece of plastic, that shows you the potency of your brain.
Man, it's like, I feel like you had an experience at 11 years old, or 11 to 15 or 16 years old, that most people have when they hit like 40, and and they can't take life. I don't want to draw myself as an example.
A little bit like that, yeah.
It's taken me that many years to understand what's going on for me, and after trying everything.
Sure,
But... And for me, I had to have some big shifts in the way I see the world, see myself, and but this experience you're talking about of going to the sea, that was a very big paradigm shift for you, where
it was
you were like, this is a different sense of reality and the lens through which you see the world in that split moment.
Everything changed, genuinely. It sounds really theatrical. The whole thing sounds so ridiculous, but it was a complete epiphany moment. And my entire perspective on life shifted, and it's remained the same way ever since. I mean, obviously I've learned and developed and I've grown, but it was the realization of how you can control your entire perspective if you understand how powerful the brain is, how powerful the mind is, and what it can do to your body, both positively and negatively. And so now if I'm in a bad state, I don't really get in a bad state anymore, but if I am, I kind of have this idea that, well, it's all relative, it's all a matter of perspective. You just have to find a way to kind of, see that actually it's not too bad. And
so this is also the formative years of your developing, growing passion for film. But you also told me once that you were a gamer, like an obsessive gamer, and is that the same period of time? Was it when you were agoraphobic?
No. This was no, not really. Although I've always been into games, so I've always been into gaming, but this was kind of this was actually a little bit later.
Because you told me like you were really like properly obsessed with gaming.
Yeah, for a while. Yeah, I almost failed my degree because I sort of almost went into professional gaming at one point and stopped turning up to just practice 15-hour days. But I was much older at that point. I was already about 20 when that happened, and then realised I'd probably better stop and focus on what I really wanted to do, which was filmmaking.
So that was just like it was just a passion, it was a folly.
I just got really obsessed with Mario Kart, is what happened. I just got really into Mario Kart, but to the point where I ended up playing competitively and getting ranked for a brief period in sort of international tournaments and things like that. Online, then got to kind of a top 10 position where suddenly it was just like, this might be a thing that I could actually do. But it was outrageously stupid, It was just
no, but it's not. I mean, there are people out there earning money.
Well, now it's very much a viable industry, but the whole this whole kind of thing of e-gaming, as they call it, esports, that didn't exist really. It was only in its formative years when I first started really getting into gaming. And it wasn't the sort of behemoth industry that it is now. It's you get these guys that are making insane amounts of money from gaming, and it's treated as seriously as any kind of sport. These kids are tapped up at a very young age, and they have to commit, and they've got to train, and it's bizarre. It's probably a documentary in there somewhere.
There is a document. I've seen it. I can't remember what it's called, but it's good. It's on Netflix. It's very interesting. So as I'm a dad, I'm a parent, as you know. You're not. You don't have kids, and you're not married, are you?
No.
You're not married, no. But you have a very long-term girlfriend who's in the same industry as you.
Yeah.
And like when you look back at this moment, I mean, as a parent would often be very worried about a kid being sat in front of computer games for too long.
Yeah.
How do you see that whole thing?
Well, I actually think that I learned so many valuable skills from playing video games growing up.
Like what?
Well, just things like focus levels, cognitive abilities, problem solving. You're effectively training your brain, and there's a huge amount of research that's gone into the benefits of video gaming. But like all things, same watching films. If you watch films all day and do nothing else, that's detrimental to your health. If you play video games all day, that's also detrimental to your health. The best video games they're not only effectively puzzle solving in real time, and some of it's actually very sophisticated. In a way, you're talking about film is passive, but video games, you're involved directly. You have choice, and there are ramifications, and the good ones make you feel guilt, and you can't get that from watching a film, really. So it's very interesting. There's a whole potential avenue for interactive storytelling, where you have a choice. You have a choice to do something that is potentially going to affect a character within a game, or you choose to ignore it. And the idea of freedom and exploration is something that I really love. I love that idea. I like that I like hiking. I like that in real world. I like that in video games. I like the idea that I can see a door in the distance on the horizon, and I have the choice to either go through that door or ignore it completely and never see it and go in a different direction. And that power is amazing. That's really enticing to me, especially as a filmmaker and a storyteller. I love that. I'm creating a story in real time just through choice and what's presented to me on a screen. I think it's amazing. Yeah. And also hand-eye coordination. Just all basic things like that. There's huge amounts of benefits. The downside is if that becomes your entire life and your entire existence, and you stop, developing social skills to actually talk to real people. I don't think that's healthy. And I would be concerned at that point, because also the thing is that there is kind of an aspect of gaming that's an illusion, where, especially if you're into online gaming, which I don't really do anymore. I mean, I don't really game that much, full stop, anymore. But you have this idea that you are socializing because you're interacting with people, right? But it's a very, very primitive form of interaction and form of socializing that isn't conducive to actual face-to-face, communication.
Yeah.
It's like all things, you have to develop those skills. And what happens is once you lose the ability to talk to somebody in real life, very difficult to get that back. In my situation, when I was in my room, I didn't talk to anybody for like a year and a half. I didn't have anybody, any interaction at all. So I was
even your parents and
just my parents. That was it.
Sisters?
But outside of the scope, except for doctors, outside of the walls of my house, I had no I had no friends anymore. I didn't talk to anybody. And so it was this weird thing of having to figure out how to actually talk to people again. I was cripplingly shy for probably the next year and a half.
Because you talked about so many people in your family dying, do you think it was almost like the desire to want to get back in the womb, like being afraid of not only death but life itself as well?
Yeah, I think so.
And
pretty much.
Being in your bedroom is almost representative of being back in the womb and that safe space in your mum's tummy.
That's exactly
Maybe
it.
That could be.
It's about safety. It's about comfort. It's about control.
Because there's all those things that happen unconsciously for us. That's going into agoraphobic situation. It's a very unconscious decision, I guess. It's not, you didn't sit down and go, right, I'm going to spend the next year in my room talking to absolutely no one and getting fat. Yeah. I don't think that was a conscious plan.
No.
Well, I hope it wasn't. I don't think many kids of that age make conscious plans. And my, through psychosomatic sort of explorations I've done, it all comes down to the unconscious. It all comes down to these decisions that we make unconsciously. Do you think that filmmaking also taps into that for you in a way that, are you ever conscious of the unconscious and how the sort of game you can play with people on a conscious and an unconscious level? Yeah,
you are. You are to an extent. It's a difficult thing because I think every filmmaker wants to say that they rely on their instincts, just like every actor wants to rely on their instincts, right? But and to some degree, if you're set up with enough preparation, you can do that. But the truth is, filmmaking is all about preparation.
Yeah.
It's all about preparation. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what kind of filmmaker you are. You're not making a film unless you have done incredible amounts of preparation. So much of the work is done in prep. So there are very, very few accidents that happen. Yeah. And, if you look at some filmmakers like the Coen brothers, there are no accidents on those set. Right. The actors do not deviate from the lines. The cinematographer does not deviate from the storyboards. Everything is planned out meticulously. But sometimes, and there's a precision about that work that you can see on the screen. But sometimes it does feel like there must have been moments that were just magic that just happened. I mean, I refuse to believe when you look at Jeff Bridges as Jeff Lebowski.
Yeah.
That there aren't moments there that nobody anticipated that just happened on a subconscious level that are just magic.
Oh yeah, it looks like that. I mean, it really looks like that. The Jeff Bridges stuff, and it's incredible how spontaneous it feels.
Yeah.
So I think what I find so fascinating about you is how what's fueled your story. I mean, the fact that you were stuck in your room for that long, you then had to, your weight changed, then you had all these psychosomatic disorders. But there's one other thing you haven't mentioned, and that's, there's not many people I meet who have type A diabetes.
Oh yeah, type 1.
And that's another part of your life that you have to sort of work with still today.
Yeah.
To this day, and but that's certainly not psychosomatic, is it?
No, that's an autoimmune virus. So that happened when I was.
And most people I meet now have type 2 diabetes, but yours is not that.
It's not. No, mine isn't reversible. But we do know that type 2 can be reversed with a combination of not for everybody. I don't want to make that perfectly clear, but with a combination of diet, with exercise, and real discipline, you can reverse type 2 diabetes. Type 1. The reason they're named the same is because there are superficial similarities between the two conditions, but type 1 is actually an autoimmune virus, which has more in common with like multiple sclerosis, or any other autoimmune virus, even something like Parkinson's. It's effectively your immune cells kind of go kamikaze, mistaking an aspect of your body as a virus, in my case the pancreas, and so I don't produce insulin, and it just happened overnight, and that's.
It happened overnight.
Just happened overnight. Yeah. So I turned 24.
When? What age?
24. I was unbelievable. Like, I told you I got into fitness. I was really healthy. I was obsessed with, 3% body fat. I was kind of, I worked out 7 days a week, really into fitness. I had a very, very good diet. I got a common cold, and I was shooting a documentary at the time. I was directing a film, and I was pretty lean, but I started losing a lot of weight very, very quickly. And I would have conversations, and I would just start falling asleep in the middle of conversations, like a narcoleptic or something. And I started going to the toilet every 10 minutes. I had to run to the loo and do these kind of really long pees. And what happened is, because at the time, I by this point, having spent like a year and a half obviously in my room and been quite a sick kid, I just didn't get sick anymore, and I just never went to the doctor. In my head, it was always like, I don't need anything. I can always.
Yeah, okay. So from one extreme to the other.
Yeah. If I was sick, I'd be like, fine. It's a matter of will. It's it's mind perspective. I can still go to the gym or work out. I'll be all right. So I just never, I just never really got too sick. I was very healthy, but I was definitely not in a good way. But I didn't know what was going on with me, and I had these weird cravings for sugar, and so I would sometimes get like literally four whole cartons of orange juice. And I would just get up and be like, I need orange juice, like a vampire, middle of the night. And I would just neck these cartons of orange juice. And of course, what was happening is my body wasn't sustaining any of the sugar. That's why I was peeing so much as well. And then eventually we were going so behind schedule on the documentary shooting because of my toilet breaks that the producer said, you've got to go there's something wrong with you and you've got to go to the hospital. And I was making a film about this community who had basically started up a sports program for underprivileged kids in East London. It was an amazing thing that they were doing. And one of the main guys that we were interviewing, obviously he was a sports specialist, started becoming pretty sure that I was diabetic. He was just like, I think you've got type 1 diabetes. Because my whole physiology changed, my physical, I started turning yellow, and I started having these incredible spasms that were really painful. I thought I had a urine infection because I did an internet diagnosis. So I started having loads of sugar and stuff. So finally I went to the doctor, first time in years, and this nurse asked me to do a urine sample. And then she took one look at this urine sample and said, you've got type 1 diabetes. And she said, I don't even need to test you. You've got type 1 diabetes. So I didn't really know much about type 1 diabetes. And I said, right, okay, what do I do now? She said, you've got to go to a hospital right away. So she checked my glycogen levels, which is what you have to do as a type 1. And an average person has between a level reading of about 4 to 7 is normal. And mine was on 38, I think, which is incredibly dangerous. And the last thing that happens before you go into a diabetic coma is you have the spasms that I was starting to have regularly, because I basically stayed this way for months and not dealt with it. So she said, you've got to go right away. So I left. I went and met my friend for lunch. I said, I just got told I got type 1 diabetes over a big, sweet potato and some tuna. And he was like, my sister's got type 1 diabetes. You've got to go to the hospital now. So I was just like, oh God, everyone's freaking out. So went to the hospital, and then, they gave me needles and stuff and gave me like a crash course, 1 hour crash course in what I needed to do. And then that was it for the rest of my life, injecting 5 or 6 times a day. And
injecting, right. That's you have to, to control your insulin levels.
Yeah, so I'm trying to emulate what the human body does. And you get an appreciation for how sophisticated the human body really is, because when you try and emulate it, it is not easy. It is a difficult thing to do. It really is. It's very hard.
So I wanted to ask you, because I've got a song of mine is called Sweet Tooth. So I just want to ask the simple question: what's your relationship to sugar now?
So
like when you're on set,
for
example, what's going on there? Like, do you ever have dips, or is it? I mean, because usually being on set, making a film or doing a day of shooting, it's really long days.
It is,
and I can imagine that you could probably easily forget to inject.
You can. I never forget to inject.
You need a chocolate bar nearby or whatever.
Well, what does happen is it's very difficult to explain to people what you can and can't eat without sounding like a massive diva, and I'm really self-conscious about sounding like a diva. So a lot of the time, rather than making a fuss and saying, I can't have pizza because pizza will cause me to have a massive spike which will last for a couple of days, which won't be good. I'll become lethargic, and it's just not great. A lot of the time I just won't say anything. I won't eat, which is not great. It became really difficult on my feature film, because if you're working somewhere very remote, you don't have many options, and effectively I have to have a kind of very low carb diet. So a lot of what I have is kind of meat and veg, fish and veg and stuff. But where we were filming, there was no access to that. So you're at the mercy of wherever you're at and whatever's available, and that can be quite difficult. But it's one of those things where you just have to try your best to regulate and figure out how much insulin to give yourself. But there's no consistency. Your body changes and adapts so much that what might work one week doesn't work the next week. So you could have a great week where you're really, your control is great, and the next week everything that you were doing suddenly is causing, hypoglycemic attacks, or the reverse. You can't get your levels, and if you get sick, like a flu or a bug, then it's very difficult to control. And at that point, you might end up going to hospital for a few days, which has happened to me a couple of times, which isn't very much fun. But what can you do? You just get on with it, really. There's not a huge amount you could do. So you're just like, all right, this is it. Fine. You just do it.
Well, I guess it's very, very much when you need someone like Adam Hunt next to you, who's a very good caretaker, and he's as a producer of the film, he's gonna you can know that he's gonna make sure you'll be okay.
Every morning when we're on set, I get a little box with my name on it, which is been prepared by Ads, and it's a little meat and veg box every day without fail. It's the only producer who's ever done it. Amazing. It's great. He knows exactly what he is. It's lovely, man. It's really nice. Yeah. It's really
and sweet. What about in your sort of relationship? Like I said, your girlfriend is in the same industry, so I mean, does it affect your relationship? That sort of do you find yourself? Does it hold you back, or hold anyone?
No.
Relationship back, or are there things you can't do? Or
what with you mean with the diabetes, or being in the same industry?
Yeah. With that, the lifestyle, and also,
well, I'm not allowed to get a PADI certificate. That's pretty much
What's
it.
That?
PADI certificate is where you learn how to scuba dive. So I'm not allowed to scuba dive.
Okay, that's it.
That's it. Yeah. Great. The rest of it is
that's
really at your own discretion. If you've got good control and you feel confident, and you have an understanding of your body enough to know that, the main thing, funny enough, isn't actually the diabetes that puts you at risk. Although, the risk of losing your eyes and amputation is extremely high for a type 1 diabetic, which is not fun. Wow. But, The main thing is the short term risk is actually the medicine can work against you. So you have to give yourself insulin, right? But if you give yourself too much insulin, you go into hypoglycemia, and the extreme version of that is where you pass out. Which, the first year of being diabetic, it happened a lot, because I was still running and exercising, and that really works against you if you give yourself too much insulin.
Sends all your sugar, your levels. And stuff.
Yeah, that's it. So all the time, but sort of straight down. So now, if we went to the Philippines a couple of years ago for 3 weeks, which was an unbelievably active holiday. It was a kind of an adventure holiday. And the thing I had to be completely conscious about was making sure I had as much sugar on me as possible at all times. If we were going for these kind of, waterfall hikes or mountain hikes, where we were going in Siargao, there aren't even hospitals. So you have to be really careful. And so it's I'm not going to lie, it's an everyday thing. You're always thinking about it every day. There's no escape from any point.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it just becomes part of routine, and you just kind of get on with it because you've got no choice. So, And this is the thing. It goes back to being in my room. It's better than staying in your room for a year and a half. So it's just
yeah, absolutely. I'm going to finish off by asking the question I ask all my guests, which is related to my song "Letter from My Future Self." If you can imagine yourself at 84 or 85, I mean somewhere around that age range. Let's say 90 if you want. And old Ian Roderick Gray is sitting and writing a letter to present day Ian Roderick Gray. What would he be telling you? What do you think? What kind of advice do you think you could give yourself as a wiser older man?
Oh, that is a good question. That's a good question, man.
Well, let's put it another way, maybe. What is it that you think you haven't yet learned that you could work on?
Well, I think, that's a really good question. I mean, because my whole philosophy is that you always have to keep learning, right? Every day you have to try and learn. You got to do something else. You can always grow. You should never sort of rest on your laurels and all of that jazz and stuff. Anything that I'm going to tell myself at the age of 90, I'm going to be like, I know. That's what I'm trying to do. Leave me alone. I'm trying to do it already. It's not giving me a hard time. Just back away. I've got to be more proactive when it comes to getting back into feature films and just giving myself a routine that is conducive to writing again. I think is the main thing from a professional standpoint, and from a sort of personal standpoint. I think it's okay to appreciate if I'm doing okay at any given moment without constantly saying no, I need to be doing better. There has to. It's a bit of a cliche, but there has to be a moment sometimes, I think, and I don't do this very well, and even as Jess actually, where we both stop and say, we've done all right, we're doing quite well, we should be proud of ourselves. Everything is always the next stage. And I'm sure it's probably similar for you as well, because if you're driven,
of course,
and you're creative, that's what you're always thinking. It's just like, I need to be here.
I'm really doing my best to practice that thing right now.
Yeah.
And a part of my album is all about that. It's just about practicing. I think gratitude is the key.
Oh yeah, because, absolutely. Yeah.
By wanting more and it's all about wanting what you don't already have.
That's
and
it.
Even if those things are unrealized dreams or images in your imagination. It's we haven't made them real yet, and that can be a constant sort of whip on the back.
Oh yeah, totally.
That you've not done enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's the torture of the artist sometimes, especially the creative, is that you once you've achieved one picture or dream, then it's just like, but I still haven't done that one, or which one should I do next? And then as soon as you imagine it, but being able to stand still and look at yourself and actually be comfortable in those shoes.
Yeah, and being present, in that moment as well.
And it does seem to be the most common thing that people are answering by this question.
I can imagine.
But maybe it's a thing with age that I mean, like where we're at in our lives, that we're kind of things are happening, but you or maybe it just never goes away. I mean,
well, don't you think this is the difficulty sometimes when I think about this stuff, and I do think about this quite a lot, is that aspect of my character is also probably the thing that has got me to this point.
Exactly.
So if you switch it off, there's that danger, because you kind of need that. It's almost a delusion. It's almost this kind of this drive that is so delusional that it's like, I'm going to be successful and I'm going to, not everybody has it.
But I think it's just, no, you're right. But I think the art of life, and I might be wrong about this, and this goes back to what you said about gaming and watching movies, it's balance.
It's balance, yeah, it is.
It's just balance. It's just you don't have to be on one extreme, and when you realise that that's not working for you, you don't have to jump to the other extreme, like from being agoraphobic and putting on weight to going being extreme
fitness.
Fitness.
Yeah.
It's there's got to be a middle ground.
Yeah.
And I mean, the only sort of viable path that seems to be actually give some kind of feeling of worth or purpose and self-worth and appreciation is to find that middle ground between those two places and realize I can actually be driven and at the same time appreciate what I have.
And have a life.
I don't.
It's it's I'll relay this last thing because I know we're wrapping up, but one of my favourite filmmakers is Paul Thomas Anderson, and I think he's one of the best living filmmakers. I mean, really, is a genius. The guy is a genius.
What's your favourite film of his?
Probably There Will Be Blood.
Right.
But I really love Phantom Thread. Boogie Nights is incredible. Yeah. I mean, he's every film he's ever made. I think he's brilliant. He's so distinct. But his first two films, I'll be really quick with this, but he said, he was like, filmmaker and a professional filmmaker, you have momentum and you don't stop. You're working as hard as you can. You want everybody to work as hard as you can. I'm working 16-hour days. And then he realised that he was losing friendships, he was losing track of what was really important, and he felt it was having an incredibly detrimental impact on his creative abilities too, even though he was riding a wave of success. So he made the conscious decision that he was going to treat film as a 9 to 5, and nobody on his sets would work past 5 o'clock, nobody would come in earlier than 9 o'clock, and if he would just make it work with the budgets and the schedules, and that would have to be that, so that he could
have a life,
be present, so that he could actually have a life. And he's a very happy guy, and he makes some very good films, so people love working with him.
Yeah.
And he seems to have found the solution. Wow. So there is that element where you have to kind of remind yourself that you don't have to be scared of backing away. Nothing's gonna. The power to say no is also really valuable. I think that's something that's taken me a long time to learn. To actually to have the confidence to say no to things. No. It's not easy. Yeah, I'm not very good at it still, but learning all the time.
Thanks very much, Ian. It was great chatting to you.
Oh, I've loved it, Charlie. It's great chatting to you, man.
Yeah, and thank you.
Take care, man.